Like I said, a few announcements, talk a little bit about the purpose of this training, and talk about especially the sensitivity of this. I want to remind you that, anyone in the audience today, anyone in your, keep falling through the crack, anyone in your small group discussions could potentially be a survivor of sexual assault. The all call that you're going to witness today, they're going to be, PowerPoint slides. I know everyone loves that. There's also going to be a video. The video itself, even for us in the office, we've seen it probably a dozen times or so, but it can be a little bit hard to watch, especially, for those who have personally been affected or know someone who's been affected by sexual trauma. So we ask you today, we've taken this whole day set aside especially to recognize sexual assault survivors, and to also discuss what offenders look like. And I know leadership is going to be talking about that thoroughly this morning, and again, in your breakout sessions, you'll be talking about that as well. So at this time, I would like everyone who has a cell phone to go ahead and take it out. And I'm going to ask a little something different of you. Of course, I'm not going to scan the room and see if you actually do this. But if you do not have the SARC crisis line number in your phone, I'm going to ask that you put it in there right now. For those of you who don't have it in your phone, the number is 701, I'll go really slow, 340 8882. And the reason I ask for everyone in this audience to put that in your phone is because it's a number that you never know if you're ever going to need. You may need it for yourself, you may need it for a coworker, a friend, or someone you've never met who's in trouble and really needs help. Also, with your cell phones out, if you could please silence them or turn them off, that would be great. If you have questions regarding any of the training today, especially this morning, we ask that you filter those questions through your small group discussions. If you feel that you're not getting those questions answered, you're more than welcome to stop in our office or call us on the crisis line. We have no problems with that. We're a response team, regardless whether it's a report or if someone has something they really need to talk to us about. You can also pop in our office. We're on the 3rd floor of the med group. And then you can also contact the office number. And I don't especially think anyone's going to memorize that right now, but we're at 5275. Also today, reminding, be respectful in your small group discussions of people's opinions and, of course, experiences that they share with all of you. And I really want to thank everyone for coming out today. I especially want to thank all of those facilitators who have gone through the training. We have well over 80 of those across the installation. Also at this time, I can't see where everyone is, but do I have any victim advocates here this morning? If you can, please stand up or raise your hand. Okay. So look around the room. If you do see someone, these are some of your victim advocates at the base. You can definitely contact them. They will have the same information that we will have. Thank you. Everyone sit down. Okay, so we're going to move on. In a few minutes, leadership is going to be coming in. We'll call the room to attention. We'll move forward. We have a few minutes left. If you need to take care of any housekeeping things or use the restroom, please do so. And at this time, ladies, do you have anything you'd like to add? All right, well, thank you. I would like to introduce your installation commander of the 5th Bomb Wing. See, the protocol threw me for a loop and hey, get up here. Anyways, okay, so we have Commander 5th Bomb Wing, Alex Mazinski, and also Commander 91st Missile Wing, Rob Vercher.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spring Minot Air Force Base SAPR Stand Down Day. As I'm sure you all know, we have a problem with sexual assault in our military. In our Air Force, our leaders have addressed this issue at all levels, and the public, of course, has weighed in as well. If you've read a newspaper or seen a TV report in the last year, there's a good chance that you're going to see a report about another sexual assault in the military. You know, these offenders, they affect our airmen, they affect our Air Force, and they affect the public opinion about our Air Force. Today, we're going to focus on those offenders, how they groom, how they think, how they operate. You know, when a sexual assault occurs, I'm sure some of you have maybe questioned the victim. How'd they get themselves in that situation? Did they drink too much? Did they not have a wingman with them? Did they wear inappropriate clothing? Well, I'll tell you, that focus is misplaced. When we have a victim of sexual assault, we need to focus on how we better support them. And we're going to have another SAPR Down Day this fall where we really focus on the victim. But today, I want you to put the offender under the microscope. Because if we can understand how they operate, then maybe we can stop them before they make the assault, and we can better protect our airmen. Next slide.
So I can look around and see it might be tough for some of you to see the slides. And so Colonel Mazinski and I will try to talk to each one of them, especially for the folks in the back. So today is a conversation. So we're starting a conversation, and in the small groups later on is really where we want you to have the conversation, because this is kind of one-sided at the moment. But if you'll understand that we're going to kick this off with just some thoughts from the top. Okay, the Secretary of Defense and the Chief of Staff have had lots of conversations about this in the public, and they certainly have told us that this is important, and so we're going to focus on it today. But I wanted you to hear their words, as brief as we could get, because they're very stark in what they say about this. So from the top of the Department of Defense and the Air Force, as well as the top of the installation, we kind of have the same message, and we wanted you to hear it loud and clear. Secretary of Defense said sexual harassment and assault is a profound betrayal in the military of sacred oath and trust that we take. And when I heard that, I think back to when we all did this. I guarantee not a single person raised their hand and said, "So help me God, and I hope I'm not sexually assaulted." But we know that it happens. Hey, that's a betrayal of the trust that you place when you say you'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. And the Secretary of Defense is saying this is certainly one of those. And his further comment is this is a scourge, okay, strong words, a scourge that must be stamped out. And that's the very top of the department. Chief of Staff, General Welsh, has spent a lot of energy and effort. Every year, all wing commanders go see the Chief of Staff, and this is the first topic we talk about. All wing commanders in the Air Force. And so I've heard the chief say it in person a few times, as has Colonel Mazinski. But what I'll tell you is his comment was it undermines mission effectiveness, the very mission effectiveness of the Air Force that he's charged to execute, and Colonel Mazinski and I execute here at the wing level on the installation. And he says that it undermines the mission effectiveness of a great force. Okay, the nation's military is a shining example, except for this. And his comment was, it is a cancer that exists in our ranks. Okay, a scourge, a betrayal, a cancer. Okay. Today we're going to focus on that. Next slide.
Next slide. Okay, these next few slides are going to present some data from a survey that was done back in 2012, run by the Department of Defense on our Air Force. We'll also present some data from 2013 in some later slides. Basically, a survey was given out to all members of the Air Force, and it was anonymous, so folks can admit whether or not they had been sexually assaulted without fear of having to come out and actually make a formal report. Each of the person icons on this slide represents 10 individuals, 10 members of our Air Force that have said they were sexually assaulted. And you can see on this slide there is a total of 3,259 incidents, all in 1 year. And if you think about the size of our Air Force, 3,259 incidences, that's about 1% of our Air Force that came out and admitted that they had been sexually assaulted in just a 1 year period. Next slide.
So now we'll kind of break it down a little bit closer. Of those 3,259 victims, okay, who said anonymously they were assaulted, 790 came forward and had the courage to say, I'm going to report it. Now, there's two types of reporting, and we're going to talk about those, and you guys are aware of those. In fact, you get those in your training. 790 people came forward and said, hey, something happened, and I want to talk about it. Okay. Our question was, why only 790? And you would know, and I think the answer, and we believe the answer is, it's probably fear. Okay. It's the fear of not being believed. Or that someone may say, you know, people are just going to say that's false reporting. Okay, so fear and the concern, that is natural, but really in fiscal year 12, only 790 felt comfortable enough or trusted their leadership enough or even the system to come forward and talk about it. Next slide.
So of those 790 reports, 449 were unrestricted reports. And as you know, that not only allows us to get the support the victim needs, but also gives us a possibility of IDing the offender. Now, those who have the bravery to come forward and give an unrestricted report, we shouldn't blame them, that we shouldn't have feelings that, hey, they're putting our unit under a spotlight for undue reasons. It's the offenders that are to blame, and that's who we should direct our negative energy towards. Those offenders, as Colonel Virtue talked about earlier, are the ones that are detrimental to our Air Force. They affect our mission, our families, our airmen. We need to find ways to encourage victims to come forward. And so today we're going to talk a lot more about how offenders operate and how they use our own biases against us in making it more difficult to believe victims when they do come forward. Now, let me be clear, this crime does occur within our ranks. I know for some of us it's hard to believe. We know that 98% of our airmen are doing the right things every day. And we find it very difficult to believe that our fellow airmen are committing this crime on ourselves. But I'll tell you, the offenders count on our doubts. And when we resist the facts, the offenders don't want to report, or the victims don't want to report, and those offenders are going to continue to operate in our midst. Next slide.
Okay, so let's go forward 1 year. In fiscal year 13, let's take a look at the sexual assault reporting, and what we saw is the numbers increased. Okay, from 790 the year before to 1,047. Okay, that's a significant increase, about 33%. And I'm going to kind of give you the facts about these numbers just to kind of scope what we're talking about. Okay, and I can already see some uncomfortable shifting in the crowd. Okay, I can already see some folks looking around going, this is not me, we're not talking about me, but we're talking about your peers. Okay, we're talking about people that have had this happen to them. And so I'd ask you to continue to stay with us. The small groups is where you get your shot to talk about what you think. Okay, let's talk about the facts. 39% of those reports, 39% were restricted. That's 412. Okay, a restricted report is good. A member goes and gets help. The chain of command is not involved. Complete privacy. Okay, the focus is solely on helping the victim. Okay, 412 of those. 18% of those restricted were converted to unrestricted. That's also healthy. That tells us that there was more trust and belief in the system, that then they could take that report after they've gotten help, and now let's focus on the offender, which is what an unrestricted report gets you. 635 of those remaining were unrestricted. Okay, that's also positive. That means that number was going up. People were feeling confident that they could come forward, and we think trust and belief is the key. Okay, so that's good. Trust and belief really at your level, that your peers will believe you, okay, that your supervisor will believe you is important. That's the most important thing. I mean, Colonel Mozinski and I guarantee you we will believe you. In fact, we have believed every case that has come forward and had it investigated, every single one. And there was one final interesting note on this, that 127 or 12% of the 1,047 are reports of assaults that happened prior to joining the Air Force. So what that tells me is people came in the service, got a little bit of information, and realized they had been the victim of this prior to joining, and then trusted they could get help, even though it happened before you entered the service, which is true. Okay, that is up from the previous year. Okay, that's also a positive and healthy sign. Next slide.
Okay, this is a really busy slide, and I apologize for those of you in the back of the room because even if you are pilot qualified, I'm sure you cannot read that writing because I can't read it from right here. But we're going to break it down for you in the next few slides. I will tell you the area on the left is, and that's a rainbow colored there, that represents actions that occur before an assault. And so, like I said, we'll break that down a little bit in the next slides, but those are really our areas that we could focus on in our prevention efforts. On the right are actions that occur after an assault. And so now those represents the things that we do when we're in a response phase. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide so we can get a little clearer.
Okay, so taking a look at this slide, I'm going to walk through this a little bit, but before I do, and I'll brief it just so the folks in the back, it's important. This is a critical slide. It's one of the most critical, I think, in the briefing this morning. And this was tough, and this will be tough for the majority of you sitting in the audience. So what does a perpetrator look like, or a potential perpetrator? Okay, here's the thing. They look like you and me. They look just like me, in fact. Most offenders, heterosexual males. Okay, that might make the audience a little more uncomfortable because heterosexual males sitting in here go, we're talking about me. I even see some guys laughing in the back. We're talking about you, the two that are laughing in the back. We're talking about you as a potential perpetrator of this event. And statistically speaking, in this audience right now, 5% are in this category of either a perpetrator or a potential perpetrator sitting right here amongst us. You're kind of well hidden. We can't see you, but you are here. And I know you're not listening to this part of the briefing because you don't think it's you. Let me walk through a couple of things. And here's what I'd ask you. As I brief this, why don't you think mentally? I did it myself when I was looking at the slides. Okay, and if this makes you uncomfortable, good. Think about this. You may be contributing, and I'll show you something later to maybe help this. Do you know people like this that have these traits? Do you work with people like this? Is your supervisor like this? Does this surprise you? Trait number 1, hostility towards the opposite sex. Okay, I've seen that. Lower levels of empathy. Just that person that just never cares. Hey, your dog died, noted. Okay, that's low empathy. Okay, I'm gonna tear it up, all right? I'm not coming to work that day. Holds traditional gender role stereotypes. When you're in there on your break or you're hanging out and you tell your buddy, I told my wife to get in the kitchen and hurry up and make me something to eat. Okay, in my house, I'm ejected from the house, all right? I would never make that statement. But if you make that statement or you just generally were brought up that way, that's what my grandmother told me. Okay, I mean, you may hold that stereotype that women have a certain role and men have a certain role. Okay, and it may even cross into, well, homosexual men do this and heterosexual women do this. Okay, those are stereotypes. If you can justify rape in any manner, under any circumstance, you're in this category. Okay, I could give you examples, but there's a rape myth. Tell me one. I'm not sure I've heard one. Okay, thank you. She was asking for it. That's a good rape myth. I applaud you for your courage. Okay, if you have an adversarial belief between women and men and women, they were put on this planet to fight and argue and bicker and not get along. If you've experienced violence as a child or abuse, okay? These are tough questions. If you've engaged in adolescent delinquency, I immediately got concerned for myself. Statute of limitations ran out. I didn't mean to steal his bike. I'm just kidding. Okay, if you can view forced sex as acceptable, okay, you might be in this category. Frequent impersonal sexual experiences. Now, I will tell you, at dinner with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force on his first visit here, I kind of said, he talked about sexual assault, and he pretty much told the two wing commanders, we got to get a handle on this right now. And I said, sir, I mean, the bar for sexual encounters in this generation is so low, so low. And he looked at me and he said, I grew up in the 70s. I doubt it. Okay, that kind of hurt my feelings because I thought I had a good one for the chief there. Okay? And you can rationalize your behavior as non-criminal, all right? So what I'll tell you is that those are hard questions, key and pivotal, and I want you to think about those in your small group discussions especially. Next slide.
Okay, this gets more to that rainbow area of the slide that we showed up previously, and it talks about the progression that offenders like to see in units. So think about these things and if they occur in your unit or not. So do you condone inappropriate behavior? Do you condone gender-specific jokes? Vulgar pictures that might be up in your unit? Any sexual comments? Any harassment that goes on? When those things happen, and I'll tell you, especially all you commanders out there, if you don't think you have a problem in your unit, the chief of staff made it very clear to us that those are the commanders that have a problem, are the ones that say this could never happen to my unit. Our units are big, and you can't possibly be everywhere at every time. And you don't know what happens when you're not in the room. So think about these things. Do they happen in your unit? And when they do happen, what does the culture of the unit do? Does somebody stand up and say, hey, that's inappropriate, knock it off? Or does everybody just laugh it off and go the other way? Do you join in? That's the type of culture that perpetrators like to see in a unit. And the reason why is their behavior can go unnoticed. You know, Colonel Virtue talked about, statistically speaking, 5% of the folks in this room are either perpetrators or going to have those tendencies. You don't know who they are. They're hiding amongst us. And when we have a culture in our units like that, it makes it much easier for them to hide in plain sight. So think about this. If somebody makes a comment like that in your unit and it is quashed immediately, how much harder is it for that perpetrator's acts to go unnoticed? What they want to see is a culture that condones that type of behavior, and they can move further to the right on this spectrum and not be challenged. The other thing is perpetrators look for targets. What type of targets do you think they want to look for? They're going to look for people who are easy to influence. Maybe folks that aren't going to be believed. Maybe they have credibility problems. Maybe they have some type of punishments that are going on. Maybe they've been getting in a little bit of trouble. They're going to look for the people that don't have a lot of friends that are willing to stand up for them. And that's why we all must intervene when we see inappropriate behaviors going on. As I'll tell you, if you do not have the courage to stand up and intervene, then you are part of the problem. And you are part of the reason that our culture is going to allow perpetrators to continue unnoticed. Next slide.
Okay, so we're back to the rainbow and gray chart that's really hard to see. So in the very middle of it is kind of when you cross the line between pre-committing an act and then the right side, which is an act has been committed and we're focused on the victim. In the middle is actually the act itself. Okay, so as Colonel Mazinski was talking about, you know, there are plenty of examples if the environment tolerates it and grooming is occurring and you can't see it because hunters are very good at hiding. The act in the middle then it allows that, makes it much more easier to occur. Okay, so when I'm talking about an act, it's when prevention fails, the left side. Okay, when people are doing things like, you know, master sergeants texting their airmen and saying, hey, you look hot today. Okay, you're setting the precursor. When a lieutenant texts their airmen and says, I'm drunk downtown, come get me and take me home. Okay, you're setting the precursor for then the act. And the act I'm talking about, sexual assault, which includes, and this is the rape, sodomy, forced oral sex, unwanted touching, or attempting any of these. Okay, and I include the attempting any of these. And unwanted touching is a big one, okay, because that's really on the fringe, all right? You've crossed the line when you do that, if it's unwanted. And then people would say, well, but she wanted it, right? As the person yelled out. Okay, that won't help you. Okay, because it's hard to prove intent. And if a person says no, I mean, that is what will hold up, is that they did not mean for you to do that, and therefore you are in the wrong. Okay, next slide.
Okay, these are concepts that have been around for some time now, but we thought it would be appropriate to review them again because when we did our last down day, I went around to a lot of the groups and I found there was still a lot of confusion over restricted and unrestricted reporting, even after all the education we've done. So what we've done on this slide is put all the traits that the two have in common. No matter what type of report somebody puts forward, we're going to make sure the victim gets support. First of all, we're going to assign a SARC or a victim advocate to them, and they're going to walk them through the entire process. They're going to make sure they're in a safe environment. They're going to make sure they get the medical treatment necessary, and they're also going to counsel them on the new Air Force program of the Special Victims Counsel. And that's somebody that can walk them through all the legal aspects of the case if they choose to come forward and do an unrestricted report. They're also going to go over all the different counseling options available, whether it be mental health or family advocacy or whatever type of counseling they want to provide. But the biggest thing the victim advocate does is make sure that that person has continued support all the way through the process and make sure that they get the help they need. And sometimes they will keep calling the person even after the person is well past the event just to check up on them and make sure that they're still doing okay. Next slide.
Okay, so you guys understand the unrestricted report gives you an immediate response, okay? And the immediate response means the chain of command is involved. Most important thing here, honestly, is that if you report this, we will believe you, okay? That is the Air Force's policy. That's the installation's policy. We believe you. All right, it takes a lot of courage to say something happened. What that gives you is your chain of command gets involved. There's help right away. The OSI on the base, they are charged with investigating this. They are the best. They do a thorough job, and they've got the assets and the people to investigate every case, and they have aggressively. Okay, and you want them investigating your case because they will get to the bottom of what happened. And then even in the toughest of cases, and this is the one that may sound most unbelievable, even to you possibly, those are thoroughly investigated, okay? And then that information comes back up to the wing commander level, not any lower level. And Colonel Mazinski and I share information and work together, and ultimately the installation commander. And I tell you that as the installation commander has the responsibility to decide which cases move forward or not. And that's across the entire Air Force. Okay, so you've got a very senior person, and I sign off on every case I hand to him and say, here's what I recommend. Okay, so you've got the most senior levels of the leadership in an unrestricted report ensuring that you are taken care of and that we go look for the offender. Next slide.
Okay, this slide presents some data from a couple more studies that really get to the heart of some of the concerns we have with offenders. So the first one, I know, again, in the back, apologize, it's going to be hard for you to read, was a study done at some colleges back in 2002. Again, anonymous surveys, and they asked people what types of behavior they've engaged in of a sexual nature. Well, believe it or not, 120 men freely admitted to acts that legally constitute rape. 120 men. What's even more disturbing is that of those 120, none of those cases were reported to authorities. Therefore, none were investigated, and none of those individuals were perpetrated. And each one of those men had an average of 6 victims, for a total of 1,226 individual sexual assaults that they were responsible for. Now, the Navy did a similar study back in 2009 where they surveyed all their incoming sailors. Very similar survey, 136 sailors admitted to acts that were legally defined as rape. Again, not a single one of them had been reported to authorities, so nobody was investigated, nobody was prosecuted. Each one of them had an average of 8 victims. 8 victims. 12% of Navy recruits that year reported having been sexually assaulted. Welcome to the Navy. And if we think that we don't have the same problem in the Air Force, you're kidding yourselves. What this should really show you is that once an offense happens and it goes unreported, the offender is more likely than not to repeat themselves. That, for those of you in the back, the huge red areas on that slide are the number of reports that caused a repeat offender. Now, some of you may be thinking that some of these reports are false. Well, these are offenders reporting. And I will tell you that when victims report, studies have shown that the average rate of false reports among victims is around 2%. So the vast, vast majority of reports are legitimate. So what does this tell us? We need to hold offenders accountable. We need to hold offenders accountable. If you are in a room and you see this kind of activity occurring, you have to have the courage to speak up and do something about it. Otherwise, you're not only putting that airman at risk that's in the room with you, you're putting a whole bunch of airmen in the future at risk as well. Next slide.
Okay, so I'm going to tee up this video that we're going to watch. First of all, the airman, this is an actual airman who is the actor. This airman is just acting out an actual transcript from an actual perpetrator. Okay, so what I don't want you to do is do not focus on the victim in this case. Okay, I want you to look through the eyes of the perpetrator and focus on Jack. Next slide. Go ahead and run the video.
I raped a woman. I don't believe that I'm a pathological sex offender, but at the same time, I raped. I met her at the bar. She was from England and had come to New York for a short time to tour with a musical review or something. When I walked in, I knew I wanted this girl. I wanted to have sex that night, and she looked like an inviting prospect. It was clear she'd been drinking before I arrived, and we had 3 or 4 drinks together. Our thighs rubbed together, my arm brushed against her breast. I was getting to her. We drank some more, and I grew confident that I was not going home alone that night. She was staying at a friend's place downtown, and I assumed that when we left together, it meant she was going over to my place. Once I had her out of the bar, she had no friends to help her, no one to call, nowhere to go except where I wanted her to go. We started walking, and she asked, "Where are we going?" I said, "Just walking." Knowing that we were headed in the direction of my apartment, we would stop sporadically and make out. During one heavy session, I said to her, "Come back to my place." She refused. I said, "What do you mean, no? This is New York City. You don't leave a bar with a guy and not sleep with him. Come on, this isn't England. This is a big city. This is how we do things." She still refused, but I could tell it was influencing her with that ridiculous line. We got up to my apartment and I began kissing her, but now she was not responding like she did on the street. I asked her, "What's the matter?" She just stared blankly past me. I began to touch her more aggressively, squeezing her breasts, rubbing the inside of her thighs. Still no reaction. I felt like I was fondling a rag doll. Not that I cared, I didn't need any response to get what I wanted. I tried to take her top off, and she locked her arms to her sides. I pulled and forced her arms until I got it off. I eased her down on the bed. She did not resist me, but moved like dead weight, staring straight ahead and grinding her teeth furiously. "Ugh, what a repulsive sound," I said. Not a word was spoken during the struggle. Just me trying to get her legs apart and her trying to get them back together. It was primal. Sex lasted about a minute or 2, and when it was over, I had the familiar aftertaste left by unsatisfying sex. My coercive power, which had been so relentless 5 minutes before, was spent. The manipulative force I had used left me empty. I didn't want this girl sleeping in my bed. I also didn't want to walk her home. She sat up in bed. She wanted to leave. But now it was 4 in the morning, and I couldn't let her go alone, even if she did know how to get back. "Just sleep over," I said reluctantly. "You can leave when it's light out." She did sleep over, didn't stop grinding her teeth the entire night. When we got up the next morning, I insisted she wait and walk out with me. The last thing I said to her when we hit the streets was, "You have to walk that way to get back to your friend's house." I raped a woman.
If we were to assign a motto to Jack or to many men like him, it would sound something like this: "I'm going to have sex tonight. If it's consensual, that's fine, but I'm going to have sex tonight." What we heard Jack describe was a well thought out, well calculated, and manipulative plan for how he was going to accomplish his goal. Whether she consented, which he tells us he knew that she did not, didn't matter to him. You can tell from his story that what she said, what she did, and what she wanted didn't matter. He was going to take sex from her. Consider if we had only heard her side of the story. What if she told us that she met him at a bar, drank with him, walked to his apartment with him, had some consensual sexual contact with him, and even spent the night with him? It's very unlikely that we would be seeing a successful rape charge to come from those facts, even though he tells us that all of those things were true, and he raped her in spite of them. It's important for us to know that this is not about drunk sex, and there's no such thing as accidental rape. Offenders such as this one premeditate their crimes, and they choose their victims intentionally. They also use alcohol to very intentionally help disarm their victims, and they ignore the signals of non-consent. You also heard Jack describe how the victim acted once she realized what Jack was about to do to her. She was non-responsive when he tried to kiss her. He described how she just stared past him and didn't respond as he squeezed her breasts and rubbed the inside of her thigh. She tried to keep him from pulling her blouse off, but he ignored her. During the rape, she ground her teeth together, stared blankly past him, and did not respond or participate. What Jack describes here is a common response to trauma, a frozen fright response. Jack told us how terrifying it must have been for this young woman from a different country to be forced into a sexual act by someone she had just met. Jack said that for all she knew, she could have just as easily been killed by him. You might find yourself saying, if that was me, I would never have done that, or I would have done this. We respond like this in part because none of us wants to believe that this could ever happen to us. So sometimes we judge what the victim did or didn't do. We play Monday morning quarterback. The truth is that no one knows how they will respond to a traumatic situation, such as sexual assault, until they are faced with it in their own life. Beware of this tendency to judge victims for what you think they did wrong. What matters is that we understand who put them in the situation and caused the trauma in the first place, the offender. In this case, it was Jack.
And next slide, please. So all the individuals pictured on this slide were members of our Air Force that turned their back on our core values and hurt someone in our Air Force family. Why do predators offend? Well, for a lot of them, it's about power and control. Just as some people, when they want to exert power of control over somebody, might raise a fist, these individuals use sexual assault to exert their power and control. And when these people offend, it's not because it's a mistake. It's because no doesn't matter to them. So from this survey that Colonel Virtue talked about earlier, 22% of assailants use some type of physical force during the assault. 21% threatened the victim and said, if you report me, I'm going to sully your reputation. And 18% of them threatened the victim with some type of physical harm if they chose to report. Over half of the victims in the survey clearly communicated no to the rapist, but the rape happened anyway. When you guys break into small groups, I want you to discuss this Jack video, and I also want you to discuss people in our ranks that might use their rank or position to commit sexual assault. Those type of individuals erode the trust that our airmen have in our Air Force. Next slide.
Okay, so as I was looking at this and how to discuss, I will tell you, again, this is a key slide. So I want to talk to it just a little bit because the green box really describes the 95% of the Air Force, which is really almost every single one of you in this room. Okay, this is not a lecture at you. This is a discussion about a part of the population of which the majority of you are not in. The green is good. You have influence. Okay, you control your environment. You're in the profession of arms. You keep it professional. 24/7. The right end, the red end is the 5%. That's the perpetrators. That's Jack. Okay? Nobody wants to meet Jack. Nobody wants to go out with Jack. Nobody wants Jack to assault them. Okay? And it is a low percentage and a very small part. The key thing is the 30% in the orange there. Okay, the 30%. Now, I'll make it a little bit personal. Okay? I showed this to my son. My son is joining the military on July 1st. He's going to do this and he's going to join us. Okay, I'm very proud of that. And I think about Jack. But I'm not going to unload all that onto my son and tell him, hey, guess what? Jack will do that to you too, by the way. Because Jack is heterosexual and Jack doesn't care if you're a man or a woman, because it's not about that. So I asked my son, hey, just look at these slides. Just look through the whole thing and tell me what you think and tell me what you cue in on. And it was about this slide that my son, who's very thoughtful, stopped. And he looked up and he realized that orange box was what concerned him the most. And what he told me was priceless. He began to look at it and say, well, all right, that orange box could be most of my peers who are not assaulters, but who help create the environment that allows Jack and other people like that to hide. And I said, now you're talking. And he said, but I don't understand. I mean, there's harmless jokes that we do. You know, he's a high schooler, just got done with it, but he's about to be us because he's going to do this. And he looked at that and he said, oh my gosh, we could be the problem. And I said, see, now you're tracking, okay? Because when you don't have the courage to tell your peers, that's unprofessional. And I know the peer pressure is immense. And as soon as you say it, they're going to single you out as not being cool, not being a part of the club. But what I reminded him was, when you do this, you are in the military 24/7. Okay? Your old life and stuff that you tolerated, or maybe high school locker room talk and all that other stuff, that is unacceptable. And it sets the environment in our units that we don't tolerate. And he even further said, you know, there's stuff we would never tell our teachers. I equate that to your commanders. And there's stuff we sit around and talk about and have a good time, and everybody enjoys it when we tell the off-color joke. Okay? Or we have the picture that we show each other on iFunny or YouTube or whatever. And what I'll tell you is that he realized, and I'd hope you would realize too, that we are in this block that could be contributing to the environment that we do not want. And if your environment is not about respect, all I told him was, then you're in the wrong environment. And you and your peers, whoever they are, because you're going to be the most junior in the organization, are the most at risk. And so an 18-year-old who wants to join us understood it. And I did tell him on day 2, first day someone's going to yell at you and hand you a bunch of clothes you've never worn, and on day 2 you're going to get this briefing. And in your small group discussion, son, that the ones y'all are about to have, you need to talk about this and not be afraid. Okay? Because people need to get this point, and this is a key part of the slide. Next chart.
All right, the next 3 slides are going to go over the Air Force's SAPR strategy, and they're all interrelated. So the first one talks about offenders, and the better we know how they operate, the better we can defend against sexual assault. So Airman, what I need you to do is know what constitutes sexual assault, know what consent means, know what acceptable and unacceptable behavior is, and I know what I really need you to do is challenge your peers whenever you notice unprofessional behavior going on in your units. Our leaders and supervisors are going to set high standards, and they're going to hold you accountable for those standards. And my military justice agencies, they're going to thoroughly investigate any reports of sexual assault, and they're also going to treat victims with compassion when they come in and empower them so that they can do reporting. Next slide.
Okay, and then number 2 is that we encourage and want victims to come forward. Okay, and we've said this a few times, but if you come forward and say it, we will believe you and we will do something about it. Okay, and that is our promise. On this installation, that's how it works. Okay, it works that way in the Air Force too. Your leadership chain of command already believes you as soon as you come forward. Next slide.
And the last objective is building that culture of dignity and respect. So again, Airman, I need you to hold your peers accountable. When victims do come forward, I want you to have empathy for them and attempt to understand what they're going through and provide them the support they need. Our leaders are going to, again, set clear standards and ensure swift discipline is done if they do see any malfeasance going on. They're also going to lead by example and maintain professional relationships with their subordinates. And as always, we have support agencies that are here to work with all victims of sexual assault. Next slide.
Okay, and this one is impossible to see. And so what I'll tell you is there's just two charts here, the left and the right, that are related to each other. And it's by service. The Air Force is the bar chart to the right on each of the two top slides. And the left is assaults and the rate at which they occur. And as you can see, the Air Force has less of it going on, which is a good thing. Okay, so that bar chart is low, but it still exists. And then harassment incident rate, the Air Force again is on the far right. It goes by service. And what you'll see is that, again, we have a smaller percentage than the other services, and that doesn't really matter compared to each other. One is bad. Then the correlation in the middle is really the interpretation. And I had to stare at this a little while, and then I realized really what they're saying is that the environment, and when leaders allow that harassment to occur, then an assault is more likely to follow because it lets the perpetrators hide or come out. Okay, and then here's your facts. And this one was stunning, okay? When leaders, that's us, or individuals, that is you, and you are leaders and individuals, allow a hostile environment to exist, women were 6 times more likely to be raped. 6 times, okay? 54% of women assaulted had a hostile environment they worked in. 54%, that is staggering. And 38% of males. So for all the men out there, I won't be assaulted, that is not true. Okay, these are staggering numbers, and it goes back to the environment, okay, which is the point of this discussion today. Next slide.
So I think a lot of you remember a couple of years ago, we did a health and wellness inspection across the Air Force. The Chief of Staff mandated that. We went through, we took down all the questionable pictures, we got rid of joke books and song books and those types of materials. This slide depicts different paraphernalia in our environment, in our Air Force environment now, that have happened since that health and welfare inspection. So a lot of times what you see is that this stuff doesn't show up necessarily in units anymore, but where it does show up is off duty. And I gotta tell you, when we joined the Air Force, we agreed to be airmen 24/7, 365 days a year. The core values aren't something that you only uphold when you're on duty, but off duty as well. So I know some of these, again, are hard to see. I want to highlight the top right and the bottom right corners. Those are posts to people's Facebook page, and for those of you in the back, the top one says, "I don't like the term rape. I prefer cuddle with a struggle." Totally inappropriate. And if you think that posting this on your Facebook page is okay, you're wrong. You represent us whether you're in or out of uniform, and believe me, people on your Facebook page know you're associated with the Air Force. Next slide.
Okay, and this one, if you look at this, I'll describe the scene. It is a foggy day, and there's a little bit of trees you can see through the fog. And that's really just meant to describe the environment that we do not want to exist in our military units. Okay, the environment that allows perpetrators to hide, and an environment that stick with things that are inappropriate or unprofessional. So that's what we'd ask you to work on, and to clear away that fog. And so what you do is when you clear away the fog and you have a good environment and you trust your supervisors and your leadership, the 5%ers stand way out. They stand way out, and that makes it easy for us to get to them so they don't continue to perpetuate their violence against our members in our service. Next slide.
All right, our challenge to you, as you guys head back to your small group sessions, I want you to really talk openly about what we discussed today. As he said at the beginning, this is more of a one-way presentation right now, but when you break into small groups, it'll be your turn to talk. So talk openly, talk honestly about what you've seen in your units. I want you to fully understand the issues. I want you to talk about what barriers are there to you intervening when you see some of these behaviors occurring. Really think about the culture that exists in your units or other units that you see on base. And also think about better ways that we can hold offenders accountable. Slide.
Okay, so we'll end on Colonel Mazinski and I see all the information that happens across the base, and I thought I'd leave you with two more facts. Okay, there were 8 cases prosecuted in the last year on this base, so we're talking about 5%ers that we were able to prosecute. And I'll just give you the low end of punishment and the high end, and then you guys are free to depart and head to your small groups. On the low end for wrongful sexual contact, 6 months confinement. That's wrongful sexual contact. That can be the external part of your clothing is wrongful sexual contact. That is unwanted. 6 months confinement, bad conduct discharge. On the high end, for sodomy with someone under 12 years of age, that was life imprisonment and a dishonorable discharge. So if you do not think that we will prosecute, that is incorrect. And if you think it's not happening on this base, you are incorrect. Okay, I appreciate you guys being here. I know this is a heavy subject. Okay, we are the best Air Force on the planet, and therefore we need you to go forward and work this hard the rest of the day and the rest of the time you're in the service. So thank you. Please carry on.